Well, hello there. This is Craig Hane or Dr. Dell, and this video is entitled Pedagogy, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And pedagogy, that's how you teach a student math or a subject. And in particular, I'm going to talk about math pedagogy in this. Now, in my book that you may have read, my latest book, How and Why, Homeschool Math Can Be Vastly Superior to Public School Math, I talk about pedagogy, spike pedagogy, which is the one that I advocate. This is a more generic discussion, and I think it's particularly valid for students that have struggled with math or parents that have such students. So maybe you can understand what their problem is and why it can be solved. Well, let's start out and talk about the good. Teaching a math subject to one student needs to be done in an interactive, self-paced way that's on the student schedule. And I talk about that in Chapter 1, Spike Pedagogy. And the reason for that is some students learn a topic quickly and some slowly. Some students learn a topic all at one time, one session. Some take several sessions to master it. Some students will have the prerequisite math background for a topic, and some won't have it yet. And of course, if they don't have it, it's important you fill that in first before you try to teach the topic. No point in teaching a student a topic if they're not ready for it. Now, a really good teacher will present a topic step by step and give the student an opportunity to stop and think about each step and ask questions if need be until the student understands that particular step and can move on. Because I say that learning math is kind of like climbing a ladder. It's really pretty easy to climb a ladder for most students if you do it one step at a time. But it can be quite difficult if you skip steps or you have missing steps. And that is often the case, and then of course that makes it very difficult for the student. Now, one-on-one tutoring is probably the best way of all, if you can find a good math tutor that teaches the appropriate concepts for your student, the appropriate tools, and does it in a pace that is ideal for your student. But this can be very, very expensive, of course. And most parents can't afford to do that. Even if you can find the tutor, you can't, it's logistically difficult. The very next best thing is probably what I call a video teacher. That's a really good teacher that presents the topic in exactly the right way, step by step, and the student can watch the video at the student's pace. They can back the video up. They can rewatch it. They can take breaks. This is something you can't even really do with a live tutor. So actually a video teacher sometimes is better than a live tutor. And of course the student can go over each step until they understand it. And then of course it's important that they have access then to someone to help them if they really get stuck and can't understand it from the video. So that's important too. Well, now, whether it's a live tutor or a video teacher, you've got to accompany these lessons with appropriate exercises. Because the facts are, math is like a game or a sport, and you're only going to learn math if you do math. I like to think of math as a game or a sport. And of course, it's not just enough to listen to somebody explain math to you. You've got to go and play it and practice it. And that, of course, is something that you have to do with any sport or game. Now, how much practice is required to master a topic will vary very greatly from one student to another, both in time and effort. And of course, students will master something, then they'll forget it, they'll have to come back and redo it. That's why you have to practice. The other thing is you need to teach concepts that are relevant to the student. That's very important. Math is a huge field, and no one learns all the math there is. So you should learn the concepts that you need to learn in the right order. In fact, I believe that a math needs to learn the concepts that are going to be of interest to the student and possibly empower the student to learn other things that are of interest, like STEM math. For example, if you're interested in STEM, you got to learn the right math concepts then to study science or engineering. Now, self-pacing for the student and scheduling for each student is very important. And you've got to do it right if you want to be efficient and effective and utilize your students' valuable time to achieve success. Many teachers don't consider a student's time valuable. I do. I think you need to think of your students' time as being very, very valuable. You want to get them to thinking like that. You want a student to do things where they value their time, because that's what you're going to need to do as an adult. If you want to be successful as an adult, you have to do things that are efficient and effective and value your time. So again, I believe that video teachers can probably achieve this in the very most cost-effective way. It's very rare that live tutors can achieve it unless the cost is just really unlimited. Now, if you're really rich and you can afford to hire a full-time tutor that's on call for the student and can teach the student on the student's time schedule, and if this tutor is a really good teacher and really knows the best topics for your student, then that's obviously the best thing. And there are parents that have done that. There are parents that have been able to get a really, really good tutor to just really devote their time to their student. That's true in sports as well. I mean, some of the great athletes that we have today had excellent teachers and tutors when they were young, very young, and they devoted their time to that student, and they became very good. Well, math is like that. If you want your student to excel at math, that's the same thing. Well, most parents can't afford it. I mean, most parents, like Tiger Woods, had this great teacher that taught him from a very young age and devoted the teachers full time to it. Well, you can't do that. Most parents can't do that. But here's the deal. If you've got videos with a good teacher and the proper content, you can actually probably do just as well as you can with a live tutor. And most parents now can provide the coaching. Coaching is a much different thing. Read my book about, I think it's chapter 7 and 8 about teachers and coaches. They're two different things, really. And the video teacher will be the great teacher, and then you, the parent, either be the coach or you can get someone to be the coach. It's a lot easier to hire a good coach, usually, than it is to hire a good math tutor. So I think the best way is for you to go out and find a program that has the appropriate content for your student. It consists of videos. You need notes with the video. You don't want the student taking notes. They want to focus on what the teacher's teaching them and asking questions and stopping. You need exercises, lots of exercises, and then you need quizzes or tests so that you can actually be sure the student is learning. The student can be sure. And you need a record-keeping system. We call it a learning management system because that is how the coach keeps track of what the student's doing, particularly if you're coaching multiple students. One coach can coach several students, obviously. Well, one way you can do this and try this all out with no risk, and it's really cost effective, is try the Homeschooler Today 5-tier math program. Go to homeschoolertoday.com and you'll learn all about it. And you can try it out actually at no risk. If you go to my personal website, craighane.com, you're going to learn about me and find out who I am and what my background is. And I'm going to give you a lot of free resources that's going to help both the parent and the student. Lots of free stuff. Now, that's not a substitute for a full-blown program, but it will really help you. No matter what you're doing, you're going to learn a lot. I will also tell you that my new book I've just written very recently, I'm doing this video in 2019, late 2019, and that's when I did this book, really. I just released it recently. How and Why Homeschool Math Can Be Vastly Superior to Public School Math. And to get that book, probably the best place to go is vastlysuperiormath.com, and you can get that book. And you get both an audio and a PDF version of it for free. And if you study that book, whether you're a student or a parent, if you take a few hours to study that book and really learn about it, you'll really understand how to give your child a superior math education. Now I want to talk about the pedagogy, first of all, that's bad. And this is what most of us and most students have been exposed to. And you need to understand it, particularly if you have a student that has not done well in math or doesn't like math. You need to understand this. Well, let me start off and tell you this. If you're teaching a group of 2 or more students, unless they happen to have exactly the same background and the same ability, it isn't going to work. Not well at all, and I'll tell you why. And I'll also tell you it's very rare to get such a group of students, 2 or more students, where they all have the same background and the same ability and the same aptitude. As a matter of fact, usually any 2 students will have different backgrounds, that is, the different things they know about math, and different abilities and different aptitudes. That's just the way life is. Like it or not, that's the way it is. In fact, I'm sure if you have 2 or more children, you realize they're very different. And it's rare to find two students that really match up. So if you teach optimally for one student, then the other one's going to suffer. That's your problem. You're either going to go too fast for the slower student, and that student then gets lost, discouraged, may learn to hate math because you're going too fast. Or you've gone too slow for the faster student, and that student gets bored and feels you're wasting his or her time. And that's not a good thing when you're teaching math, because time is valuable. You must think of the student's time as being valuable. Worse than that, in a group setting, there will often be bad interpersonal dynamics between two students. And that can be very difficult to control or avoid. And any teacher knows that if they ever taught a group of students, even two students. Most parents know this if they have two or more children. Now, the larger the group of students, I said two or more, the worse it gets. Any honest math teacher that's taught groups of students, like I have, will testify to this. When I taught groups of students, I used what I call the Socratic Technique. I would ask them questions, and I'd lead the students through a thought process. And that's really the only way to teach math. And when I did that, without exception, I was too fast for some of my students. They couldn't keep up. And I was too slow for others. Usually when I was in a high school classroom, I was on a schedule. So I had to go at a certain pace to meet the schedule. That was too fast for some students, too slow for others. Those are the two complaints I get. Oh, Dr. Hane, I can't keep up. You're going too fast. Well, I'm sorry, but we got to go to. Or others would be bored. Now, I will tell you, it was very frustrating for me as a teacher to realize that I was failing. I put that in quotes. I was failing many of the students. I was too fast for some. I was too slow for others. Those were both problems I had. And any math teacher that's honest will tell you that. That's just the way it is. And that's what we had to do in the 20th century. Industrialized classroom teachings. And we still do that today. That all started well over 100 years ago. Well, it's maybe all you can afford to do, but it's not effective. That's one reason our students today are doing so poor in math. It's not because of the students. It's because of the methodology. It's because of the way we teach them. Now, the good news is modern technologies have changed all this. And now we can actually utilize what I call the good pedagogy. Go back and read chapter 1 in my book on spike pedagogy. We can do that today, and we can do it cost effectively. And so you say, well, what about a classroom then? Well, the classroom teacher now can become a coach. Read my chapter 7 and 8 about coaching. Let the video teacher deliver the self-paced training. It'll be delivered through the internet on a computer. The students will all be going at different paces, and the coach can now walk around and coach the students, or maybe have group sessions where you just do things together, and maybe one student can help another student. But the point is, each student is going to get the pace they need, and again, going to be able to learn math in a successful way. And believe me, that is so much better. And by the way, I've done it both ways in industry. I've taught the same subject in a classroom format, and then the same subject in a classroom where the students took it self-paced, and I was the coach, and believe me, the latter was much better. I happened to be the video teacher, but each student was going at their own pace, and believe me, this was in industry, and it's quite a story, and it worked great, and this happens, and this is what happens. Now, the ugly, and this, unfortunately, is what many math students, including me, are subjected to. Suppose you got a classroom teacher that just gets up and lectures on a topic. Lectures. Not much feedback from the students. Well, let me tell you, that's much less effective than a classroom teacher that uses what I call the Socratic Technique. And that's how I used to teach, and I was a much better classroom teacher than most of my fellow teachers because of that. And by the way, I learned that because I started teaching my fellow students when I was very young. And so I didn't know much more than they did. So we would learn together, kind of, as it were. And well, here's what the Socratic Technique is. You lead the student through a thought process, a learning thing, by asking questions, a sequence of questions. And if they can't answer it, you ask a simpler one, back and forth. It's very hard to do, by the way. A lot of teachers can't use the Socratic Technique. Now, I had a company called Hane Training, and for over 2 decades, for 25 years, almost 30 years, we taught thousands and thousands of skilled tradesmen for big companies like General Motors and Caterpillar and so on, utilities, the military. And we used a Socratic technique. Now, we'd have small classes, 12 students max. I'd hire a new instructor, and I had to teach the instructor how to use the Socratic technique. And it'd take about 3 months to teach a new instructor to do it. Very few instructors, even though they've been teachers, knew how to do it. And I'll tell you this, I hired some great instructors that were really good lecturers, and they could not master Socratic technique. I can tell you some real war stories on that. It was a real frustrating thing for them and me too. As I said, the Socratic technique is really much, much more difficult than lecturing. That's why most professors lecture. Lecturing, relatively speaking, is much easier than the Socratic technique. Okay, even when we use the Socratic technique in classes, we still had the problem. Too slow for some, too fast for others. And as I said, we had small classes in this industrial training, and they were hands-on. We had labs and experiments, and that's really what saved us. We not only did we use the Socratic technique, but they spent half their time doing things with labs. And then we go around and deal with them individually like a coach. So not only were we teaching Socratically half the time, we were coaching half the time as they did things. And Hane Training, by the way, was a very, very successful training company. And I sold it some years ago. Now, in a high school, it's just very impossible. It's just impossible. A high school classroom math teacher with a large class has really an impossible challenge and is going to, quote, fail most of the students. Even the ones that get good grades, they failed them. I know, I was a classroom teacher. I think I was a very good classroom teacher. But I was quite aware that I was failing many of my students. And I didn't have the time to tutor them one-on-one. Now, worst of all is a teacher that doesn't really understand what we're talking about here and just gets up and gives a bad or even an incoherent lecture. Now, that's really, really ugly. And I know I had many such teachers, all the way from elementary school through graduate school. I could tell you many, many stories that demonstrate it. If we wanted to make this a 3-hour video and let me just tell stories, we could do that. Unfortunately, these teachers aren't rare. It's not at all uncommon to have a teacher that gives a very bad, incoherent lecture, no Socratic technique, and the student just gets discouraged and quits and basically fails. And that's why they grade on a curve, by the way. They then give tests to grade on the curve because the truth is most of the students didn't learn much of anything. Now, I was lucky. I was very lucky. I'm fortunate. I had 3 very good teachers. Basically, in essence, kind of one-on-one, and they saved me. I had my Uncle Jack at home when I was in elementary school, and if you go to my website, I have my Uncle Jack videos you can see. In high school, I had a woman named Miss Madonna O'Hare, and she was a wonderful teacher, and I hated algebra, but I had her in geometry, and I loved it, did well in it. Then I went to college, DePaul University, when I was still in high school, actually, and took algebra with Dr. Gass, and he was a great teacher. These 3 teachers saved me. Now, when I got to regular college, Oberlin College, I didn't have any really good teachers. They weren't bad. They were good lecturers. They weren't really ugly, but they were still that. And by the way, I tutored my fellow students starting in high school. I became a teacher, one-on-one tutor, when I was in high school, teaching my classmates. And I did that all through college. So I'd actually, by the time I graduated from college, I'd been teaching tutoring and was a problem station instructor for about 6 years. And I had great success at that, because usually it was one-on-one. Now, ironically, when I went to graduate school, I had the worst classroom teacher I ever had in my life. I mean, he was absolutely the worst. The first semester, I had this teacher in a subject called modern algebra. It's a required subject of all beginning grad students. You have to take it. And he literally flunked all of the students in the class, including me. He flunked everybody. He got mad at the class and flunked them. It was devastating for the student. They didn't know what to do. We're first-year grad students. It's a required course, and we flunked it. What are the chances? Well, I was a little more mature, I think, than a lot of my fellow students, and I took it as a challenge. Now remember, I taught math now for several years, and I knew he was a horrible teacher. So what I did the second semester, I took him again for the second semester, and this time I learned the subject from older graduate students that already knew the subject. I'd go to them, and I'd ask, they would tutor me, and I would ask questions one-on-one. Then what I would do, I'd meet this professor after class, one-on-one, and I'd start asking questions, sort of a reverse Socratic technique, if you want to say. And he would answer, and we would talk and converse, and then I learned from him. And he was very responsive to this. He loved it, in fact, because most of his students, as you can imagine, they didn't like him. I don't say they hated him, but they were afraid of him. Well, I wasn't afraid of him. I knew he was a lousy classroom teacher. He was horrible. But he knew his subject very well. I could tell you how he taught in the classroom, but it was just horrible. But he knew his subject. And he was very responsive to meeting with me, and he adopted me. He thought I was one of the best students he'd ever had. He loved me, and he became my major professor for my Ph.D. That's who I did my Ph.D. thesis with. One-on-one, he was great. He was a wonderful teacher for me because I dealt with him one-on-one. Now, I was told by my math department chairman at Indiana University when I was a grad student that only 1 in 10 grad students are going to get a Ph.D. Really, 1 in 10. And he told me that when I opted not to get a master's degree. I didn't want to take the test. I don't like tests, and I didn't want to waste my time preparing for it. And I went to him. I said, can I stay in grad school if I don't get my master's degree? And he thought I was crazy, but he said, well, okay, sure, fine. Because after all, grad students are mostly slave labor to teach the undergrad, the elementary classes, and I was very good at that. In fact, I was one of their best, and so he said, fine. 1 in 10. I wonder why. Could it be the bad professor? But by the way, I didn't have a good professor in grad school. Now, the one I told you about was the worst, but none of them were any good. They lectured. They get up and lecture. Well, what I would do, I would learn the math from other resources. I would go to the advanced students. Or if there was a book involved, I'd learn it from a book. Sometimes there was a book you could use other resources. That's how I learned math. I didn't learn from the professors. Except I would approach them one-on-one and ask questions. I'd learn from them then. Let's put it this way. I didn't learn from them in the classroom. That's what I should say. I'd go to them one-on-one and ask questions. And not many students did this. I don't know why they didn't do it. Now, I'll tell you this. I was not any smarter or more gifted mathematically than most of my fellow grad students. They'd all done well in college, and they all went to grad school in math. And you don't go to grad school unless you've done pretty well in college. In fact, I had the worst undergraduate grade point average of probably any grad student at IU because I was not actually a very good student as an undergraduate. I had the same experience there. I'm telling you about grad school. Well, I had similar experience as an undergraduate. And I didn't make very good grades. Well, anyway, as I mentioned, I taught high school really as a tutor and as a classroom teacher for many years before I went to grad school. Because I started teaching as a tutor when I was like 15 or 16 years old, taught all through college. Then I taught high school full-time for 1 year. And that's when I realized just how horribly difficult it is to teach in a classroom. I taught Western Reserve High School in Wakeman, Ohio for a year. I taught all levels of math, all 4 years of it. I loved the students. I loved it. I loved this experience. But I knew I was failing most of the students for the reasons I explained above. It was just awful. I never had a failure, by the way, as a one-on-one tutor, only as a classroom teacher. Anyway, I used this approach in grad school. In fact, I had 3 different professors invite me to be their Ph.D. student. They thought I was really smart. Now, let me tell you this. Most people are not going to go to grad school in math. I don't recommend it for most people. Very few should even consider. STEM math is a whole different subject. And I'll tell you this, STEM math is much easier to learn today thanks to modern technologies. Now today, good pedagogy is possible for any student. I tell you that about my book, Spike Pedagogy. And like anything, you're probably going to have to experience it to believe it. But the good news is today, in the 20th century, this is 2019, it's easy to do and it's inexpensive. So here are the conclusions that I'm going to draw for this rather lengthy video. If you're a student that's had a bad experience with math, or you're a parent of such a student, don't give up. It's not probably your fault. It's not because you're stupid. It's not because you can't learn math. It's because of bad pedagogy and probably bad content too, which I talk a lot about in my book. You really need to read my book. And by the way, if you'll learn some math and take some math training that's got both good content, good for you, and good pedagogy, you'll do well. And fortunately, today you can do it very cost effectively. I couldn't have told you this 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, but you can do it today. And that's why I wrote a book in 2019 on how to do it. How and why homeschool math can be, not is, can be vastly superior to public school math and private school math too, any classroom math. Now you can get a free copy of this, it's PDF or audio, either one. Go to vastlysuperiormath.com, vastlysuperiormath.com, and get your free copy. Now this is true even if you're going to a public or a private school. You can still educate yourself at home thanks to modern technologies. The truth of the matter is, I went to public school, high school, college, graduate school. But I learned most of my math on my own. I learned it from homeschool techniques and technologies at the time, people that I learned from. I learned more math in a certain sense from other resources than I ever did from classroom teachers, with 2 or 3 exceptions. Okay, I recommend that you simply try a modern 21st century math program that utilizes these modern technologies that I described to you in my book. Get a good math education instead of a bad, or even worse yet, an ugly math education. Now, this will be cost effective. It's going to save you a lot of time, but best of all, it's going to open up many other educational and occupational opportunities for you. And my book explains all that in great detail. So this video is really to explain what the problem in a sense is in a generic way with the pedagogy we have today. And of course it's the delivery systems and the content are both important. So now I hope that this will encourage you to read my book. It's only 75 pages long, and it's got audio version. If you don't want to read it, you can listen to it. And I'm guessing if you'll spend 2 or 3 hours of your time as a parent or a student, you're going to have a completely new view of math education and what it can mean for you and how you can do it. And that is our mission. That is my personal mission, and that's our company's mission, Triad Math, Inc. That's our mission in life, is to help students improve their lives for themselves and their families by learning the appropriate math they need. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. There are many more at my personal website and also when you go to the book. So I will perhaps see you now on another video. This is Craig Hane or Dr. Dell. I hope you're having a great life. I have had and am having a great life, and I hope you do too. See you in another video. Bye-bye.